healthcare and medicine has moved on. We're no longer this stoic picture of the GP behind a desk making all the decisions. They realize that having a helpful collaborator, in this case, powered by a bunch of NVIDIA chips in a data center somewhere, is a benefit.
Hello and welcome to Pulse, your podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. This is our Hot Topics show and I'm your host, Louise Schaefer.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
George, I'm going to brag. I am in the French Alps right now. How's it in Sydney? Because it's pretty nice here.
It's cold. We've had rain for the last 5 days. I went down to Melbourne yesterday. It wasn't raining, but it was colder. So I'm sure you're enjoying the French heat wave in the right place for it.
Oh my God. Yes, it is really hot here. The lowest it's been is like 21 degrees overnight. And so it's warm all the time, as you can see with my tiny bit of clothing that I'm wearing. It's very hot, even though it's morning. But I look out the window and I can see snow because the Alps are right there and there's snow on top. Yeah, it's very strange to be in this hot environment where there's no air conditioning anywhere, so everyone is melting, but the snow is also melting. So the river, it's just basically rapids the whole time.
You've got mountains with snow on them. You've got sunshine. Here, I think it's 12 degrees today here in Sydney. And talking about rivers, it was raining so heavily on the weekend that there was a river flowing down our street. So I think you've definitely got the better half of the deal, Louise.
Okay, yes. So what was the event that you went to in Melbourne?
I went down to Melbourne for Monash University's Creating Health AI That Matters, it was called. It was hosted by our good friend, Dr. Chris Bain. And it was a full house. There was probably a couple of hundred people in a very packed lecture theatre with a very packed program by a number of clinicians as well as a lot of the IT faculty at Monash. It was probably a bit more technical than, again, that's because I'm a clinician, but there were quite a few clinicians there and they all had some interesting stories to tell. And I have to take my hat off to Chris Bain and his team. They did a good job in getting them organised. It was a full-on day with some really interesting innovations and hopefully we'll see some stuff coming out of there that makes Australia proud.
That's fantastic.
I was surprised by the number of IT people that came up to me asking about getting involved in health IT. So I don't know whether they're worried that AI is going to replace them as coders and they need to find another job, but I think the school have done a pretty good job in demonstrating how they can use IT to solve problems. And that was the focus of the day, around using it to solve problems.
And that's where we should start always, isn't it? With the problems that we're trying to solve.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Excellent.
And you're basically, at the moment, you're still on the holiday part of your trip, but you're about to head off to England for the business part of the trip?
Yes. I'll be heading off to England. I was in Wales since I last saw you. Spoke at a conference in Wales for RLDatics. And then RLDatics has got me back at their big summit that they host. And that's actually going to be in Telford. And that's next week. So I'm heading over there for then. So this is just, I'm working. It's not a complete holiday, but if you've got to work, you might as well be in the French Alps, I say.
That's right. If you can work, we talk about working from home, but I'm never sure that the government's got its head around working from the Swiss Alps as part of the solution.
No, the beauty of working for yourself, I think. And actually, one of the things I look forward to telling you all about it is they do paragliding here, like a lot of paragliding. The locals are into it and they offer it for tourists. And I've never done it. And so in the next couple of days, I'm going to be jumping off one of those mountains in a paraglider. So I'm really looking forward to that and flying through the air for 20, 30 minutes.
Oh, wow. I hope you have someone there taking photos of that. That's definitely something you want to...
Yes, I will pay extra for the GoPro.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
That's definitely a bucket list thing, but I'm looking forward to seeing the photos of that.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing that's happening here is they have an ultra marathon, which was on just the weekend gone. I didn't even know about these things. 90-kilometre race through the mountains with a combined elevation of over 6,000 metres. It's like 6 kilometres combined elevation. And the person who won it, I don't remember the exact timings, but it was like 9.5 hours, something like that.
It's continuous running uphill.
Yeah. And I guess you're going a lot of up and down because the mountains are about, I think they're like 3 or 4 kilometres north of where I'm sitting right now. So they're very tall, but they're not 6 Ks high. So it must be a lot of like that combined elevation. And so the town has been jam-packed. It's all these people here running the marathon and people supporting them. And they also had like a 10K and a 40K. But and it's all trail running. So I remember once I sprained my ankle on a gum nut. And I'm like, how do people do trail running without dying? I don't understand, let alone 90 kilometres.
I'm assuming you didn't put your sports shoes on and join the ride?
No, I watched them and clapped a lot though.
That's an important part too.
Yeah, but just amazing. And the elevation is so high that you have oxygen deprivation at these heights as well. So the training that must go into it is just incredible.
So you're surrounded by ultra fit people running up and down mountains.
Yeah. Everyone here is just wearing shorts and everyone's super fit.
And I understand you had some struggles finding food. Maybe all these ultra marathoners were eating all the tofu in town. Was that what happened?
It must be, because yes, I don't understand why. Why would a small town in France not have a large selection of tofu? Yeah, it took me about 6 shops to finally find some. And then I found that, and I asked the lady, and she said, oh, it's really difficult to get and there's a shortage. So I went back and bought pretty much all the tofu there on the shelf, because I'm here for another week. So I need to be able to eat some protein, and otherwise it'll just be legumes for me.
When in France, do as the French do, I say. So if I see you coming home with a cigarette and a baguette, I'll know.
I would look good in a beret. Shall we get into our hot topics, George?
Let's go with it.
All right. Our first story comes from a friend of the pod, Charlotte Louise at Uppsala University in Harvard, who's led the 3rd annual GP AI survey tracking how UK GPs use tools like ChatGPT in their work. Now, this is a snapshot of real clinical behaviour. Pay attention, people, to these numbers. It's significant. The survey shows that just over half of UK GPs, that's 52%, are now using generative AI in practice. And that is up from 25% a year ago and 20% the year before. So this is an acceleration of technology use that we just have never seen before. The most popular tool, ChatGPT, and then followed by AI scribes, and then Microsoft Copilot. And the GPs, they're using it for writing letters, referrals, real-time documentation during live consultations. And 70% of users say it's cut their workload, and nearly half see the AI tools as a collaborator working alongside them rather than just simply a tool. Now, there is no reason to think that this is purely a UK phenomenon. It is likely to be mirrored not just here in Australia, but in other health systems. So, George, what do you think about this shadow AI use? Because scribes is one thing, but ChatGPT being the top number one and Microsoft Copilot, I would think a lot of that is this shadow AI use, which is running ahead of regulation, training and consent too.
First of all, I have to say that Charlotte Louise has been prolific since publishing her book, Dr. Bot.
Yes.
And this article, amongst many others, she posts regularly on LinkedIn. She has her own Substack. She's really become one of the superstars of health technology, and I take my hat off for her to her there. My question is, if 52% of UK GPs are using generative AI, what's the excuse for the other 48%? What are they? We've got a collection of medical Luddites, or they're just scared to admit it, because the reality is it's a tool that's available to everybody nowadays. And I really don't think there'd be too many UK GPs who don't have access to a smartphone or a computer at their desk. And the tools are so prolific now that not using it becomes really a question about, are you doing the best things for your patient if you're not using a tool like that at your disposal? I guess the key thing, of course, is the question was, were they using it clinically? And yes, they all highlight that they are using it as a tool to help with their administration. I mean, those scribes play a great role there, but they're actually evolving usage models in real time. And I think this is a really exciting development in the use of AI in healthcare, in that clinicians are taking something which is available to them. But if you look at the NHS guidelines, they haven't officially been given the seal of approval to use this. But the reality is that 52% of them, and I suspect it's actually much more than that, have discovered that it actually provides them with some value. And this concept of a shadow system, I think, in primary care is something that's really quite interesting. Of course, we're having this adoption by clinicians who are normally the last ones to go forward aggressively because of the medico-legal concerns and the reputational concerns and the compliance concerns. But these guys and girls have realized that it adds value, and they're using it. And 52% in a year, a doubling in number of relatively unproven, unverified technology, I think is a great sign that there's something to be done here. I think we have to really give doctors credit for having some capacity to be selective in how they use it. I'm sure most of them aren't going out there and saying, please solve all my problems. And this concept of a helpful collaborator, and 46% of them said that was a helpful collaborator, I think demonstrates that healthcare and medicine has moved on. We're no longer this stoic picture of the GP behind a desk making all the decisions. They realize that having a helpful collaborator in this case, powered by a bunch of NVIDIA chips in a data center somewhere, is a benefit, is a tool they can use. I find this is a very positive story. I think it demonstrates that clinicians are willing to use tools that have benefit. They still need to work out the risks associated with them. But in this case, it seems they're using it within the confines of how they practice medicine.
But one of the things I thought was really interesting is the focus on like the workforce implications and professional identity. And George, you've seen me give a talk. I have a talk that I've given a few places now on professional identity when it comes to AI, and it's always received very well. I'm thinking maybe I should write a book about it as well. But anyway, that's a story for another day. But Charlotte asked about professional identity, and rather than clinicians seeing it just as a tool for their productivity, they really expect that redesign of what it means to be a doctor. And only 3% thought that GPs are going to be replaced by AI. So that is good. But the other interesting thing in the data that only 23% would encourage someone into general practice just as strongly as before AI. So the people, they might be using it, they might be thinking it's a great tool, but they're still not sure what it means for the future for their profession. I would have thought, if anything, hey, my job is now easier. Instead of just sitting in a room on my own, I now have a research tool that is a great collaborator, helps me. It makes my job even easier and better. Hey, we need more people in general practice. That actually 1/3 of GPs said that they simply don't know what advice to give someone who's thinking about entering GP as a career. And this was all specifically related to AI.
And I think that reflects what we're seeing across all the professions. So if you speak to lawyers, if you speak to engineers, you speak to teachers, they're all sort of in that same quandary where we know this AI tool has some huge potential benefits. It's a very powerful technology. We've heard Ray Kurzweil and others talk about the singularity where the whole world gets turned on its head. And last time we talked about Harari's vision of how it's going to revolutionize the world. We really need to come to grips with how we're going to utilize this tool more effectively. Fascinatingly, they're talking about using it as a redesign. I think that in itself is a really positive sign that rather than see this as a threat, they've seen it as an opportunity to evolve. And
yes,
evolution, as Darwin has taught us, favors those that are willing to change. So the ability to change and adapt to the AI tools, I think, is important. It was fascinating. You would have thought more of them would be worried that their jobs are on the line. They obviously recognize that tools aren't there yet. ChatGPT was only released less than 3 years ago. So the rapid evolution of these tools is really hard to come to grips with. The fact that they think that it's made their job easier, but they're telling their kids to not do it. The whole idea of what the workforce is going to look like in the future. And we've heard about this, that people keep on bringing up the examples of the Industrial Revolution and the horse and buggy riders, their jobs, and people who made horseshoes lost their jobs, but new jobs were evolving. We haven't quite worked out what the new jobs are in AI. There is a lot of books coming out now suggesting, woe is me, the world's coming to an end. So I think we need to try and be a bit more optimistic than that and realize that there is a way of doing this more effectively. But hopefully there's always a job for podcasters.
Yes, of course. With our insightful commentary.
Although, I have seen some AI-generated podcasts. I still think we sound better than an AI-generated podcast always. So.
Yeah. Well, we can train it with our voices at least. And maybe, you and I get the morning off and we can just leave it to the eye to have a chat. But yeah, I do think this work really reinforces that theme as well that we've discussed a lot on the pod, that the demand side, so clinicians' demand for the use of AI, patients' demand for the use of AI is moving much faster than institutions, whether that's your employer or as an organisation or whether it's government or it's a regulator. Our institutions are just lagging behind this, and that concerns me. So hopefully data like this, which is really important, and we will continue to look for similar data that's out of other countries. I'm sure someone must be researching GP use in Australia. But anyway, if you know of anyone who is, please shoot us an email and we can feature that work on the pod.
We should have a chat to Michael Wright of the team of the RSCG. Because again, I think this is important work to be done. This is, don't bury your head in the sand and let the AI sort of sweep above you. But if we play a more active role in both the development, the governance and the usage of AI, and as we've discussed many times in our podcast, get the patients actively involved. The reality is the patient cohort that we're used to now is going to be very different to that we're going to have in 10, 15 years' time. And an interesting article came out by a friend of mine, Tobias Silverson, looking at the healthcare requirements of younger people and their expectations around healthcare, but also their delivery models are going to be different. So we need to evolve. Evolution is critical. And maybe this is the time when we get that inflection in the way healthcare is delivered.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's go to our next story, George. It's a good news story. It was published in Nature Medicine and then it was picked up by the New York Times. So, of course, it went viral. It's essentially a case study where AI saved someone's life. So a 45-year-old man turns up in a New York emergency room. He's coughing up blood, struggling to breathe. He's had these symptoms for a while, but his chest X-ray shows up clear and his ECG is abnormal but inconclusive. And the doctors knew that he had been exposed to the Californian woodfire smoke. So they sent him home with an inhaler and some asthma medicine. And he didn't know this at the time. This hospital had an AI trial. So his ECG was then analysed by an AI program called Echo Next. It spotted a pattern of possible severe heart damage and he was urgently recalled. Further testing revealed catastrophic heart failure caused by a rare genetic condition. So without that AI alert, he may have never received the heart transplant that ultimately saved his life. Now, the AI tech that saved this guy's life is now FDA approved and it is about to be made freely available through open evidence. So I love that this doesn't require new expensive scanners or more tests. It's just applying better software to existing data, extracting more information from a standard test than a human cardiologist can see. So George, should this type of test, now that it's approved in America, be used as a population screening tool, maybe identifying thousands of people with undiagnosed heart disease?
This was a very interesting story, and I must admit, I first read the New York Times version, which to me sounded more press release and clinical reference. So I then went and found the original Nature article. And it does demonstrate a couple of things. It demonstrates that medical diagnosis is hard. Persistence is a virtue that you have to continue to search for the right answer. And anyone who ever watched the TV show House will know that he usually got the diagnosis right after a couple of botched attempts. So it really is an iterative process that is difficult, and patients don't come up with the classic presentations. Even in the article in Nature, it talked about the atypical presentation of structural heart disease. I mean, this guy was sick. He had a really bad heart.
Can you imagine coughing up blood and then go home, he's an asthma puffer.
Exactly. And I have to say, in this case, I suspect that the emergency department, stuffed it up. That was a young person that sick coming in with what was obviously something seriously wrong, would have probably got a lot more investigations in one of our hospitals. But echocardiograms aren't an easy test to do. And the reality is, to do a good echocardiogram, you need to do what's called a transesophageal echocardiogram, where you stick the echo probe down their throat to have a better look at the heart, which is not a simple procedure in itself. So I suspect that New York Presbyterian at the time was really under the pump, and the ED guys missed out on it. And that's human. That's reality. I've worked in an ED, and sometimes you make mistakes. Humans are known to make mistakes or just make assumptions. But coughing up blood, and when he came back, his ejection fraction was 10%. I suspect that if it was a young doctor who sent him home, they're probably getting a bit of a stern talking to from their superiors. But the great thing about this was they had this Echo Next technology being trialed in their hospital, and they used it to basically take the information that they already captured. So you're right. This didn't require them to throw this person through a new scanner or do a whole bunch of tests. It's literally just take an ECG, which 95% of people in that environment who are coming in with potential heart problems would have had done. The key thing here is that it doesn't change the workflow. So you still do the ECG, you just make sure the information goes to the right place, and we can demonstrate the importance of having standards and structures in place to share that information. But the thing about screening tools is you have to understand the two parts about the sensitivity and the specificity. Sensitivity, how accurate are they in diagnosing something? Specificity, how often do they get it wrong? And what is the result of getting it wrong? Now, in this case, their specificity is reported to be around 80%, which is pretty good, but still means that 20% of the positives are not positive. Yep. So what do you do with those? In this case, you do an echocardiogram. Now, no big deal. If it's diagnostically accurate, you'll find that there's a disease there and do something about it. If you find out that it's not, the world hasn't come to an end. But in some other cases, sometimes the next step after screening can be a lot more invasive. So you need to think about the pros and cons and the fact that it's being now incorporated into open evidence. And I've spoken quite highly about open evidence a number of times in our podcast. It's the most used AI tool by doctors in the USA. It's going to be integrated into it. I was actually listening to a podcast just yesterday as I was flying back from Melbourne from the founders of Open Evidence. And these guys have come in with a strong concept of helping clinicians make better decisions. They've managed to get the company valued at $13 billion as a result. So there's something to be said for it.
Doing okay.
The net effect of having this fully rolled out will obviously need to be evaluated, but I can see it as a simple add-on that doesn't add complexity to workflow and has value. Now, if it diagnoses one extra person with structural heart defect, I think it's great. If you look at the paper, they're talking about potentially 2,000 to 3,000 people a year being diagnosed if the current numbers are correct. I think that's an amazing opportunity. And again, just demonstrates the value add. So again, technology as a value add into clinical workflow. This is a great example of clinicians and technologists working together.
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking about the business model here. So diffusion of innovations, which many listeners of Pulse would be aware of how that works. But instead of years of someone listens to this podcast or they've read the New York Times article and they go, oh my God, that sounds great. I would love the use of that in my hospital. You'd have to convince a whole bunch of people, money has to be found, then you have to go through procurement and maybe a year later, maybe you've got an outcome. Now, instead of waiting years for local procurement, thousands of clinicians, like you said, around half of US doctors, I believe, use open evidence. So we're now talking thousands of clinicians are going to gain access to this tool pretty much overnight. So we're looking at a new AI marketplace emerging so that validated clinical tools can rapidly reach frontline clinicians in a way that's never happened before. And the hospitals aren't going to say, oh, no, we're not going to turn on that feature. Like in a normal enterprise environment, it'd be like, hey, we've got this new feature. You can pay us extra for that if you want. And then again, procurement cycles. But now it's just like, oh, the software's uploaded and here's the new feature. It's changing business models rapidly.
Yeah, look, I think one of the key things here is going to be real-time evaluation. So once this is used in a more general basis, looking at what the net results are, like I said, I can see lots of upsides, but potentially there are downsides, and that's where real-time evaluations will come into play. One of the things we see in the pharmaceutical world, we talk about these phase 4 trials. You do all the clinical trials, you test it in a controlled environment, and then you do the phase 4 trials. Once a drug is released, you evaluate what the net effect is in a real-world environment. Those are the sort of mindsets we need to start having around these technologies. How do we evaluate these in real time? And that will demonstrate that we need to spend some money on evaluation, not just spend money on development. So we develop new products, we throw them to the market. That's not the end of the story. We need to keep on following up and seeing what happens. And again, to our earlier discussion, this is where we need to think about how the profession evolves. And I think this is one of the challenges, is how do we get the right people with the right skills in the right place to have these sort of discussions and move things forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we will keep an eye on stories like this where we're looking at where these new marketplaces are going to be and new tools and technologies. And let's see what data comes out regarding this Echo next. All right, George, on to our next topic, from assistants to agents. Now, we've spent the last 2 stories talking about AI assisting clinicians. Now, this story is about AI starting to act like one. Agentic AI, so systems that don't just answer a question, but take a series of actions towards a goal. Well, agentic AI has arrived in medicine on 2 fronts at once, and so we're going to discuss them side by side. So first, on the research front, friend of the pod, Eric Topol, on his Substack, flagged 2 papers published in Nature in June. One is called Mirror. It's an AI agent dropped inside a simulated emergency department, and it was able to take patient histories. It ordered and read labs and imaging, it prescribed and even scheduled surgery and made admission decisions across hundreds of real ED cases. Head-to-head against board-certified physicians on identical information, it diagnosed correctly around 88% of the time versus 78% for the human doctors, and followed prescribing guidelines far more closely. Now, the second one is Google's AMIE, or AMIE. They looked at conversational AI to help manage disease over time. AMIE built and managed care plans longitudinally, and its treatment plans were rated by physicians as good or better than primary care doctors. And then the last one in this little segment is on the real world front, a Palo Alto company called UpDoc announced what it billed as the first FDA-cleared clinical AI platform, an agent that can adjust a patient's insulin between visits, order the confirming labs, and document it all in the EHR without the patient needing to book an appointment to talk with a human clinician. I can't believe I'm saying words like human doctor and human clinician. Okay, the headlines read as though it's the first autonomous AI physician, and it's clear it is not. And I'll add a link in the show notes to Johan Schrechther's analysis in Analytics. Effectively, the FDA has approved a protocolized clinical workflow that uses AI conversation around a deterministic core. So basically, we still have clinical decisions operating inside healthcare providers' set limits, and there's an LLM layer wrapped around it. So it's not really an autonomous agent, not yet anyway. So George, what do you think? We may not yet be at the AI agent as AI doctor stage with these proof of concepts, but we seem to be entering that era already. Do you feel like we're watching medicine's agentic future actually arrive in these types of stories?
The first two studies, Miro and Amy, have garnered a lot of attention over the last couple of weeks. Eric Topol did a fantastic analysis of the two articles, but there's also been multiple other clinicians kicking in. It's interesting that it's been quite a diverse response. So some clinicians see this as the beginning of the end, and the computer overlords are about to take our jobs. And others have said this is purely a research initiative and has no real tie to what's happening in the real world of medicine and should be seen as purely an experiment. But the reality is most papers made no premise that they were AI doctors, but they talk about moving towards that, moving towards an idea of agentic healthcare. They're pretty well done research projects. I have to give it to them. And when you look at the articles that come out of them, they have lots of supporting data behind them. They do look at two different aspects of medical care, a simulated emergency department versus a simulated, essentially a general practice type component managing someone in the community. And they both said very impressive results with regards to accuracy. Miro did a great job in determining what tests are required. It did a pretty good job in diagnosing difficult cases. It did tend to order more blood tests than real doctors did. So maybe the fact that it had access to more information than a real doctor did influence that. But at the same time, it ordered less scans. At least the accountants would have been really happy that the radiology department's budget wasn't going to get blown out. I think these in the future will be seen as seminal papers of the move towards AI-enabled healthcare. Now, the Amy paper basically had a couple of consultations with people and developed a plan. Now, what it did, and this is something that's really important, is that it had as its LLM basically all the eminence-based guidelines and evidence-based guidelines out there. So it had a huge repository of what's considered to be high-quality guidelines. And to no surprise, when it delivered its care plans, it stuck pretty closely to these guidelines. And there is a seminal paper called Care Track, which came out a few years ago, and we've actually had an Australian version of it, which looked at how well doctors actually stick to guidelines. And generally, we don't. Something like 55% of the time doctors stick to the guidelines. And there are pros and cons about this. And we often argue that by sticking to the guidelines delivers us the best outcomes. But the reality is it's a complicated profession, and sometimes you need to not stick to guidelines. But in this case, Amy stuck to the guidelines. And if you're a strong believer that guidelines are the best way to practice medicine, then Amy is better than human beings in that regards. On the other hand, many people argue that by not following guidelines and by evolving new ways of delivering care, we have an opportunity to improve care. So still early days. I think these papers will demonstrate that the technology is becoming better enabled. It is still very text-based. It still makes that assumption that the patient is giving you accurate information to rely on. And I keep on referring to my favorite TV show, House, but yeah, patients don't necessarily give you all the information in a format that's totally usable. So part of the job of a good clinician is to dig that out. But it goes back to that original discussion we had about Charlotte Blease's paper. The use of the technology as a helpful collaborator, I think, is being enforced. The fact that the tool, in conjunction with the clinician, as a tool to drive the clinician to do things in a more standardized way or a more evidence-based way, I think the combination seems to be the secret here. And as yet, it goes back to the challenge we saw, and it came up in Charlotte's paper as well. Education around how to use AI and education around the pros and cons and the risks is something we're still lacking. And I think that's going to be part of what we really need to work on in the future, is to better educate and better prepare clinicians and patients around what AI can and can't do and how to get the most out of it.
I mean, it is such early days, but because of the speed of change when it comes to AI use in health, we really need to think about these issues now and think about what it means for professional practice, which again, we discussed with Charlotte's article. So Topol argues that the future of medicine is going to be clinicians supervising teams of agents. So you have different agents, agents that specialize in diagnostics, others that specialize in documentation and what have you. And I was thinking about what we are allowed to do as any type of clinician anywhere. It is strictly regulated and guarded from university level all the way up to, professional practice. So what we teach, how we practice, professional development, but effectively our entire healthcare system and profession is organised around people. Of course, why would it not be? But agentic AI organises work around tasks. So what we could see in our not so distant future is some tasks stay with the clinicians, others move to agents, some are shared, but then you've got the role of the clinician changing to some sort of supervisory role so that we've still got a human in the loop. So is anyone thinking about this when it comes to professional practice guidelines? I still remember that it was a big case of an OT used a TENS machine, and it was strictly regulated that only physios could use it. And I think the OT ended up losing their professional license over it, even though they taught us how to use them at uni as well. So I think I'm going to have to update my talk on professional identity now, I think, to talk around agentic and what that's going to mean for the profession, because we need to start having these conversations and thinking it through.
This is another great example. So the TENS machine, and I remember when that hit the press many years ago, this professional use of TENS machines, and yet you can buy a TENS machine on AliExpress for $29.95 and use it at home now. So the reality is that we're probably a little bit overly precious with our professional status. However, the big issue that comes up whenever we're defending ourselves in healthcare is medical legal responsibility. If something goes wrong, who cops it? And in this case, it's really hard to sue an agentic agent. I don't know how much you can do about that. But as we've seen in Australia now with the social media ban and the fact that the big tech companies have, to all effects, been ignoring it, the government's now stepping in and throwing legal responsibility onto the companies that provide the technology. So we haven't quite got our heads around what happens in this case. Ultimately, we don't want to have that issue. We don't want people to be focused on what happens when it goes wrong. We have to try and focus on making sure everything goes right. But the reality is that all medical procedures, all medical activities have a risk associated with them. Does agentic AI explain that risk, or does it just do it? And I think we need to think about those sort of things more. Your presentation, we really should bottle your presentation. I think it'd make a great TED Talk for you to publish out there, Louise. But people need to think about what this means to the humans who are delivering care. If they are going to be replaced by technology, does that mean the people who are involved in healthcare become a different caliber of person? People who would have normally been empathic, passionate healers go and find another job because their job has been replaced by an AI tool. These are the sort of things that we need to take into account going forward.
Yeah. Well, it's all fascinating, but it is time for a quick break. And when we return, we're going to be discussing a robotic-led breakthrough in cancer drugs and discussing the transformation of medicine from episodic observation to continuous observation. Back soon. Welcome back, everybody. Now, we are going to be talking about robots. Now, one of the biggest frustrations in cancer treatment is that even when a tumour appears to disappear, a tiny number of cancer cells can survive. These so-called persister cells, they evade treatment, lie dormant, and then trigger relapse months or years later. Now, these persister cells are incredibly rare, sometimes just 1 in every 1,000 tumour cells, and until now they've been almost impossible to study at scale because of their rarity. Well, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco have now built an automated robotic platform that can test thousands of miniature tumours simultaneously, allowing scientists to rapidly identify drugs that can eliminate these hidden cells. Now, in lung cancer alone, their system identified nearly 10,000 different treatment-resistant cell states and found 9 existing drugs that consistently worked against them. So, George, you found this story, and thanks for finding it. It is another great example of automation and AI accelerating not just healthcare delivery, but the discovery of entirely new treatments.
Found this story particularly fascinating because it covered two really interesting areas. Cancer is becoming more and more of a challenge going forward. And the reality is many of us who have had families and friends affected by it know what amazingly tragic process it can be. And then you get this concept of reoccurrence. People go through treatments for cancer, they get the all clear, and then 6 months later, someone comes back and says it's back. But the fact that we can kill 999 tumor cells, but the one surviving one little cell in a human body, which has over 2 trillion cells, can still kill you is something which is really scary. So the fact that research is being done to discover these persistent cells and then to look for ways of treating them, I think is really important. And we know that our oncology colleagues have done amazing work over the last few decades, and we've seen mortality rates from cancer significantly drop, but still one of the biggest killers out there. And then we have robots. We all love robots. I went to a conference last year in Singapore, and there were probably 10 or 12 different companies with all sorts of weird and wonderful robot formats. And there's a big fascination with this concept of the android robot, the humanoid robot that can cook and clean and does everything a human does. But the reality is, when you look at this story, the robots are very different. These are automation robots that move trays of cells around and get them pipetted into it. And I'm sorry, my good friend Elon Musk, who's developing the humanoid robot, that may not be the way of the future. Whenever you see a story about lab research, you see a whole bunch of white-coated scientists pipetting into these little tubes in a wet lab. That's the way research has been done up until now. Here, this project in California has demonstrated that by using robots, they can do it 1,000 times more efficiently. They can analyze tens of thousands of combinations of drugs in the time frame that they would normally analyze a dozen. So this is a great example of using automation for tedious workflows and using it to solve a really complex problem. I think this is a really good news story. It really demonstrates how the engineering people and the research people can get together. And what's the biggest problem you have as a research lab? We can't pipette fast enough. We can't get enough people with white coats to stick a drug into a sample tube and see what the net effect are. The robots can come along and do that a lot more effectively, giving us time to think about new ways of treating important things like cancers. Whether these laboratories may now move to automated self-driving laboratories that work 24/7, does that mean we're going to be able to move drug discovery from what currently takes 5 to 10 years to 1 to 2 years? That's going to be an amazing improvement in delivery of healthcare services. Again, it's one of those examples of the futuristic use of technologies being used to solve a real problem. We just can't pipette fast enough in real life, but hey, robots can do it better.
Yep. And I love using existing drugs. We've talked a lot about new drug discovery, but actually finding new cases that drugs can actually work on. I love this story. So thank you, George.
That in itself is, we've got literally tens of thousands of drugs out there that we know they have very specific use cases, but as we are starting to understand at a molecular level how these drugs work, and we've talked about things like AlphaFold and all that sort of research being done in that space.
Yes. All right, George, for our final story today, and more love for the engineers in this one. So our final story, we are giving a shout out to a team of engineers at UNSW led by Associate Professor Huang Fan, who has built a tiny wearable patch called OsCool Patch that does something we've never been able to do before, continuously listen to the heart, lungs, and blood flow. Now, it's about the size of a large stamp. It weighs 3 grams. It sticks to your chest or your wrist and streams heart sounds, breathing, pulse waves and blood flow to the phone over Bluetooth. Now, it's early days. This is a proof of concept tests, but it has been published in Nature Communications. Trials with heart valve disease patients are about to start with the goal of AI flag deterioration alerts. So instead of a stethoscope or blood pressure cuff providing just a few seconds of information during a consultation with your clinician, this patch could be used to monitor patients around the clock at home and to use AI to detect signs of deterioration before patients even realize they're becoming unwell. And we talk a lot about the wearable market that does that quite well these days. Now, George, we have such great innovation coming out of Australian unis and startups, and well done everyone in this team at UNSW. But we also have yet another example here of healthcare moving from snapshots to continuous monitoring. So from that reactive care to proactive care.
This is, again, a really exciting story. And I'll throw in a disclaimer. I'm a UNHW graduate and I'm on the advisory board of the biomedical engineering group there as well. And people like Nigel Lovell, Branko Sella, Socrates Dokos, these are really smart people who have been working on some really amazing technologies. And this idea of a simple stick-on sensor that can continuously monitor heart and lung sounds, the things that doctors spend years learning how to do with a stethoscope. I mean, using a stethoscope looks simple enough, but the nuances of what we're listening to through that stethoscope and the synchronization of that with the timing of heartbeats and the sounds and the associated sounds of various organs. So you're listening to a heart and a lung at the same time. These are complex. They're hard work. They took us a long time to learn. And whilst we know that wearables are really good at detecting pulse rates and respiratory rates, the reality is the really useful information that helps us make complex diagnoses is come from things like a stethoscope. So the fact that now a 3-gram piece of plastic stuck onto your side of your neck can give us real-time information about heart murmurs, clicks, asynchronous beats, all these sort of things that become important is making these sort of decisions is fantastic. Previously, we'd listen to someone's heart for 30 seconds, a minute at the most. And if we happen to hear something wrong at that time, we'd act upon it. But for the other 24 hours times 60, whatever that is in minutes per day, we have no idea what's happening. So using this patch, I think, gives a real opportunity to capture these longitudinal information in the real world environments. Sitting down in a doctor's office and saying they take a deep breath while I listen to your lungs is great. But whilst you're climbing a set of stairs at home and you're starting to get dizzy and we know what's happening then, that's really useful clinical information. I think the key thing here again is that demonstration of collaboration between the engineers and the clinicians. And the University of New South Wales has gone a long way towards doing this. So the International Centre for Future Health Systems, I had the opportunity to visit it a couple of weeks ago. It's here on the campus of the Prince of Wales Hospital. Next time you come to Sydney, you got to see this, Louise. They've put a bridge between the medical school on one side of Botany Street and the International Centre, they call it the Translational Research Hub, which is on the hospital campus on the other side of the street. And the two buildings are connected by an overhead bridge. So they've actually demonstrated a physical connection between the university and the hospital. And our good friend, Professor Michael Kidd, who's now Australia's Chief Medical Officer, was the inaugural director of this International Centre for Future Health Systems. And I think that's going to be one of the major changes. We've moved away from having a centre for heart disease and a centre for lung disease and a centre for orthopedic disease to this concept of the health system, how the health systems integrate. And that's going to require us to have multidisciplinary teams of clinicians, engineers, accountants, philosophers, getting more people involved in design of the healthcare system going forward.
I love it. Oh, and I love the idea of using philosophers. Maybe we throw some anthropologists in there as well, like these people who think their brains are amazing and combine that with the science brains.
And since we're all going to lose our jobs to AI, we're going to need something to do in the future. So that may well be where we all become parts of huge think tanks and solve the problems of the universe.
I love it. All right, George, do you have any recommendations for the Pulse Potties this week?
Good question. Look, just the sheer volume of stuff that's coming through, I think it's really important to keep on top of it. So I think, one, listen to the Pulse Pod regularly. And the fact that we're starting to get these articles published in things like Nature is, to me, such a radical shift in the quality. So just keep on reading, I think, is the important thing here. Just keep your eye on what's happening. And the best way to do that is to listen to Pulse Pod every week.
That's right. I love that. I have a TV recommendation, so nothing to do with digital health, but I wasn't sure whether I was going to enjoy it, but I've binge watched it the other day. So there's a show on Netflix called Legends, and I was binge watching. I'm like, this is really good. And I'm like, is this based on a true story? So I go to Wikipedia and find out it is based on a true story. And it's set in Margaret Thatcher's time as Prime Minister and her war on drugs. And effectively, a group of customs agents, like the people who check your suitcases at the airport, they set up this little unit to go and bust the drug smugglers. And it's a good show. I think there's like 6 episodes or something. But yeah, it's called Legends, and I've really enjoyed it. You'll recognise a lot of the faces from British TV that are in other things. I think you'd enjoy it, George, when you finish watching Emily in Paris.
So we've just completed all 5 seasons of Emily in Paris over a 1.5 week period, and realised that obviously their wardrobe budget must have been astronomical because we never saw the same outfit twice. But it'll get, again, a bit of a light thing. But yes, I'll definitely look out for Legends.
Yeah, you like it a lot. All right, until we meet again, George, if you would please read us out for today.
Thank you all for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Thanks to Emily Maher and her team for their support. Big thanks to everyone for listening. Make sure you subscribe, follow, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Visit pulseit.news to catch up on the news from Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland. Send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@pulseit.news. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. And au revoir, Louise, to you in beautiful France.
Au revoir, George.